Michael, Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our defense against the snares and wickedness of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. O glorious Prince of the heavenly army, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and every evil spirit who prowls the earth seeking the ruin of souls. Amen.
We're here in Denver. We just got done doing a covert entry class related to trying to get in and out of places without being seen, figuring out locks. Basically, it's a class we do to kind of keep people's, their cognition or how they recognize safety and some of the locks that we put on our houses and how to, how that's sometimes false, This is a new feature we wanted to do for you guys. It's we're going to call these video field notes, basically small episodes of conversations that I'm going to be having on the road or just having outside of the studio space, and just get into some interesting conversations with some people that I've not only worked with, learned from, and collaborated with, but some of my friends as well. I'm going to bring you into this weird road life that I have. So Moses. Moses has been somebody that has been a source of knowledge for me for a while. A few people might know this about me, but I'm a subject matter expert when it comes to Mexican criminal and folk occultism. Some of this has led me to be asked by members of law enforcement and a few other government agencies out there that have asked me questions related to the symbology of certain things appearing in certain altars across the United States and abroad, the symbology of certain folk saints being utilized by certain cartels to basically add a little bit of insight into that. When I bump into a wall, when I don't recognize something, when I don't figure something out myself, or if I don't go out there in the field and talk to people about it and I just don't come to a dead end, I usually call my friend and brother Moses, who... I don't know. How would you describe yourself? What's your how would you introduce yourself?
A cultural anthropologist.
A cultural anthropologist.
Sure, and then you could say folklorist.
If you want
to color it a little more.
Sure. We started talking. I started asking questions. We started connecting, and you came to one of our urban movement classes.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Our urban movement classes are basically urban survival classes we do, and part of the class is to figure out how to hustle and or how to panhandle. And you start doing readings, spiritual readings for people.
Well, you told us to only bring our normal daily loadout, right? And so it was all cops and military guys, so they had their loadouts. Tarot cards and, a Bible and, the egg chalk that we used to draw on the ground.
Yeah.
It was my loadout. I worked with what I got.
So, I was walking around seeing what students came up with. Some people came up with they were playing an instrument. Some people had a dog, asking for money, and you were doing a full-on reading for people out there as far as what their faith has in store for them. That was a pretty interesting experience, kind of seeing you do that and interact with people in that way. Led to a lot of conversations, and then us working together on a few projects we're gonna announce at the end of this. So how did you get started in this?
Man, I feel like I was born interested in it. You see movies growing up, something resonates with you. The brave hero, the knight, the whatever. For me, it's always the wizard.
So occultism.
Occultism,
the forbidden aspects of spirituality.
To me, I was into computer hacking when I was a kid, as you learned this weekend. So it was the same thing. It's this idea of you can't do that. Oh no, actually you can, as long as you know how. Maybe you can. There's some secrets that some people maybe know, and you're gonna have to. I think that's what we connected on. You're gonna have to track it down and kind of make some relationships and learn some things, mouth to mouth, hand to mouth. So basically, the fascination led you to go and seek out oral tradition, folk magic, oral traditions, things from the source. Yeah, I always kind of it's one thing to learn. I'll use that example of hacking, right? It's one thing to learn it in school, go learn cybersecurity. It's another thing to go learn it from the hackers. Well, it's just like breaking into houses, right? It's one thing to learn it from the people who break into houses, and it's another thing to learn it the other way. Yeah. And so I went to school for cultural anthropology, and I learned the academic way. And then I was like, well, these people don't seem like they could break into any spiritual houses. So then I started talking to the other ones.
this is a weird aspect of life and a very misunderstood aspect of life. You know, we've just gone through a period of history that is turbulent, to say the least, as a planet.
Yeah,
you know?
as a species.
Death has been around us a lot in these past 2 years. You know, people have lost loved ones. There's this whole global uncertainty. I have this feeling that people are reconnecting with certain aspects of what was lost during this whole, period of a lot of what is considered traditional, or a lot of the stuff that links us back to an ancestral past.
Man, I was looking at some research of the period during the pandemic, how people identify globally religiously. 20% of the world identifies as folk religion. That's wild. That's wild.
It's a wild aspect. I first started noticing aspects of the hidden or the occult in Mexico when I was growing up, seeing in my family's Guadalupano roots. Basically, all my families, most of my family are devotees of the La Virgen de Guadalupe, and there was some pretty native stuff that would happen. Some pretty extreme acts of faith by walking barefoot towards a veneration point, or going on your knees on a pilgrimage and carrying a giant statue of the Virgen de Guadalupe. Things that I went through growing up, and things that my cousins and stuff like that go through. And it's a common practice and thing. Things that people probably from the Western point of view would kind of freak out with.
Sure.
These are in my background, and as I moved to the United States, some of these things kind of went into my background. It kind of went into the foreground of what I was doing.
Yeah.
But now they're back. It's as part of my healing process and not drinking, going through my issues with PTSD and stuff like that. A reconnection to my roots and ancestry has been something that's been pretty powerful for me and sustains me.
It's grounding, right?
Like it's very grounding.
You get a sense of who you are.
Yeah. So there's a saying. I think it's from the Polynesian people. We're walking backwards into the future, and all we have is the faces of our ancestors to tell us where to go. Right.
Yes. Excellent.
When I was going through my process of reconnecting with my own, spirituality and some of these aspects of life in general, we started conversing. We started talking about some of these things. You are probably one of the most knowledgeable people I know on the occult, and that's why I come to you a lot with questions, things work related and not work related. What place do you think this whole alternative spirituality has right now in our modern culture?
Man, I think we have this interesting inflection point in time with the progress of technology and things where, when I was growing up, what we'll call alternative spirituality was still, even here in the States, like not something you ever discussed publicly. It's not something you identified with, even if it was just crystals and angels and stuff, and not the death and all that. But now it's sort of found a place to give a voice to people who can't find it in the mainstream. The Catholic Church scandals all happening in the past 50, or being revealed, we'll say. Yeah. So many people were kind of like, that's the last straw, and never. What a collapse of faith for so many people. And that was like our parents' generation, So yeah. It's like, now we have a generation coming up that, in a time of extreme crisis, in a time where the institutions and things we relied on could not have even predicted, let alone control, mass death and utter disruption of order. People are saying, okay, maybe the fact that some of these old ideas persisted so long means they helped someone in the past when things were less predictable. And people are finding utility. That's what I love about, the folk religion, folk magic, whatever. That is the practical, pragmatic. You work with what you have at hand to solve the problems in a way that, look, if you try it and if it works, you try it again. It's just like, I think of basic superstitions. Yeah. And how those things hang around.
Yeah.
Why,
And why do they hang around?
Yeah.
So I've always viewed I grew up Catholic, and so did my parents, and so did their parents, and so did their parents, and so did their parents, and I have a clear line and connection to that spirituality all the way back to, as far as I can see, as far as my ancestry. I don't find that a lot here in the U.S. I find a separation of that and almost an almost cultural amputation or disconnection with the past, with a lot of the people that I meet here in the U.S. and sharing some of my just how I grew up, and it fascinates some people that we have a connection at least to a distant past and a tradition that, knock on wood, we have this thing in my family where you don't pray to Saint Judas as a saint because you might get the other Judas on the line.
Yeah. So
it's the last saint you pray to. And that's probably a tradition that has been with my family since, some of my ancestors were probably natives of Mexico, were converted.
And learning about Judas and Judas, yeah.
Yeah, and learning about these two things. What do you think? Do you think it's a factor?
So what I think in America, we have a few things, right? Like most of our ancestors who came from another culture that had some of these more longer roots, we'll say, came here to escape whatever was going on there and to be American. And that meant the melting pot, where the edges of everything kind of got lost. And then religion sort of took a distinctly American form. So mass media, also the scale of the country, the scale of the population, and therefore the scale of our media and its ability to reach people, and frankly, like our deep love of capitalism, led America to do some very interesting things. If you think of, because when Spain went to Mexico, the conquistadors, they were the powerful ones, but then again, the church had power over them.
Yeah.
It's interesting because at the point of arrival, the church had no power over the natives. The conquistadors did. They had swords and stuff, and the church had power over the conquistadors, but the church had no meaning to the natives. And, we've discussed many times how it was when concepts that resonated beyond even language, right? Symbolic concepts that resonated deeply were seen, then all of a sudden there was a connection, right?
Displaying a man on a cross.
You have a God that bleeds for miracles. We have gods who bleed for miracles. Yeah, we get that.
I could see that. The fact that Cortez brought with him a statue of La Virgen de Guadalupe, which looks nothing like the Virgen de Guadalupe we have in Mexico now. She had a crystal scepter. She was standing on top of a crescent moon. What people don't realize is that Mexico was conquered by a conquered nation themselves. They just got out of the conquest of the Moors. So they came with that trauma and conquered another culture. And I know it's an interesting difference as far as what happened in the U.S., like what happened to America, the U.S., and what happened to Mexico as a country. Both of them conquered, and how, what really killed a lot of people was a virus that the Spanish brought with them. Right. It killed about 90% of the native population. But a lot of the big differences between Mexico and other parts of the world that were conquered was that the Spanish mingled, mixed.
Right, there wasn't this othering.
Yeah. And you can see that mingle and mixture within folk religion, and like we're about to talk about specifically around Santa Muerte, and how it is an interesting example of a probably a pre-colonial spiritual practice that has taken cultural elements, symbology, and basically camouflage of the conquering spiritual practice of Catholicism, and used it to survive to our days.
Well, we have that, just like we were talking about, the idea of like, we know bleeding gods, right? Like, as we've discussed before, even back to like basic shamanic systems, right? The idea of finding something beyond words, understanding beyond words in suffering, in actual physical pain, or in trials of endurance, or of taking yourself out of your normal state, closer to the state of death, what they call a liminal space. That idea is in virtually every faith.
Yeah.
The idea in Catholicism that here, you need to be saved from a bad problem, eat the body of the God and drink the blood of the God.
Yeah.
Whether it's received as intended or not, it's a certain, receptor.
Yeah.
And, it's almost like, I guess I would say it's often framed as like, here's a pre-colonial tradition that suddenly got this other tradition rained down on it. And it's more of this like melding together, breeding together of two pre-colonial traditions, because the tradition of memento mori and of death, Rey Pascual in Spain, that goes way back.
Yeah.
But before they came here. So it's these like parallel traditions
of life and death, acceptance of death, or viewing death as a separate energy or entity. Is that...
and the ever being ever mindful of death, right?
Yeah.
And we talk about all the time how like that is in Japan in the samurai culture, and it's totally unrelated. But if they sat down, would it make sense? 1,000%.
Yeah,
they get that.
The Goitis in Hinduism, basically the devotees of Kali that utilize, burial mounds and
skulls
and bones, and have this relationship with death as well.
And of course, we see it in Africa and in the African diaspora in so many different forms.
In military culture in the U.S., where they utilize skeletons and skulls as
I was going to say
symbolism.
we're talking about many warrior cultures here.
Yeah,
and that's why like death is always there.
Yeah,
either you're on one side or the other, and if you have a very uncomfortable relationship with it,
you're not an efficient warrior.
Well, not only are you going to die in battle, but that's like obliteration. We were talking about the difference between death and obliteration, right? The flower dies, and then at some point it's obliterated. It's in oblivion.
Yeah.
And like, if you don't have a comfortable relationship with death, then you have oblivion.
Yeah. So the aspect of, let's delve into Santa Muerte for a bit, because this would kind of lead us onto what we're going to talk about to kind of end this. I grew up with this practice in a country that grew up with this practice, and I've seen it, from my perspective, spread from Mexico into the U.S. and take on different forms and interesting practices and symbolism and people claiming that they know everything about where it came from and lineages and all of these things. I was introduced to it in a few ways, but specifically some of the people that I work with were devotees of Santa Muerte, and they would put on Santa Muerte regalia, and we were doing basically the most dangerous job on the planet at the most dangerous time.
Yeah, the most dangerous job in the city, in the most dangerous city in the world.
So for me now, it seems pretty fitting and natural that obviously they would imbue themselves or cover themselves in what they considered was something that would protect them, which is the resolute acceptance, and not only acceptance but veneration of death, right? What do you think Santa Muerte is, like, as a faith? How would you describe it to somebody that kind of that you meet and they ask you, what is Santa Muerte to you?
Yeah, I would describe it as a branch of folk Catholicism, right? It's hybrid. It's not purely Catholic by any means, right? That's what we mean by folk Catholicism.
Yeah.
There's this interesting historical quirk that in a lot of the Spanish territories, they came and set up churches, and they were like, it's too hot here, it's too dry here, we're out of here. And they kind of just left them with some crucified guys and basic context, a translated Bible, and that's it. Have you do it. So you have like a lot of filling in the blanks. I think Santa Muerte fills in a very, very big blank. I think you have this intertwining thing of the feminine energy, the dark feminine, they sometimes call it when they're talking about archetypes in the academic literature. But where do we come from? Where's, whether you want to talk about our souls, ourselves, whatever it is, where are we before we're born into this world? We're in some dark place. And where do we go when we pass? To some dark place. So what is that? That idea of the unknown, it's often associated with the ocean. Because what's across there? I don't know, back then.
Source.
Yeah. The
substrate.
The ultimate, right? No matter, it's the when we think of even the water cycle, right? It rains down on the top of the mountain or snows on the top of the mountain, it goes down the rivers into the ocean, and then from the ocean it goes back to rain down again.
Yeah. What would you say to people out there that might be listening to this who are of another faith or persuasion of another faith and will consider all of this satanic or demonic?
I think that speaks to a certain relationship with death.
Yeah.
That equates death with evil.
Yeah.
And, in some theologies, to give proper respects, there is a theology based on life. And in those cases, they do equate death with evil, and that is their theology. But I think in most cases, people see something skeletal and think bad, scary.
Yeah.
And
Poison bottles having a skeleton on the cover have programmed many people to view it as something that is probably dangerous or bad.
And, for most of human history, a skull, and especially when I say most of human history, I don't mean recorded history, but most of human time, a skull was your connection to who you are, your past. You have your ancestor's skull on a mantle. Obviously, that's not practiced in most households in America these days. But we keep the ancestors' ashes on the mantle. We totally get that, We have it's a particularly American thing. The Romans had it too. It's not the first time, but I want to be young forever. I want to be hot forever. I want to live forever.
This obsession with eternal youth, not dying, not decay. No, the demonization of decay. Basically.
Yeah, well, and it's like the demonization of even aging, right? Like be in flower and never form a fruit in a way that's immature.
Yeah, I get that. Now, as somebody that has practiced this faith and considers it not only as a fundamental aspect of who I am, but also a cultural aspect of who I am, because it has a culture to it and has a heritage. A lot of people died and were persecuted to try and save some of these traditions and some of these aspects to our day. And it's clear in how it hides itself within Catholicism or within aspects of Catholicism and symbolism that you can see how, a lot of people tried their best to keep some of these things and pass them forward into the future, despite all of the odds. There's no Church of Tlaloc in Mexico. There might be now, but it's a new thing. But Santa Muerte has always been around. I've gotten attacked online and gotten people saying horrible things about this aspect of who I am because of the not understanding it, and also they don't realize that there's a cultural heritage aspect to it as well.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. We were talking before how academics usually take this outside view of it, and from the outside, so often she gets described as like the saint of the downtrodden. Yeah, and that's like the academics projecting their view of the average Mexican citizen.
I've met many a well-off Mexican that has a giant Santa Muerte altar in their house, and there's absolutely nothing of them feeling that they're downtrodden or on the outside or different.
Yeah, there's this projected otherness that gets put onto Santa Muerte as a weird thing.
Yeah,
and is it a matter of them hiding her in Catholicism or finding her in Catholicism, or maybe finding her because she's hidden? And it's more subtle, I want to say, than just like, oh yeah, we're going to need to cover this with that so we don't get in trouble.
Yeah,
one of the things I've always studied is how people preserve, obviously, folk practices. And that includes religions, right? The Jews in Spain during the Inquisition. There's a whole culture of secret Jews, right? That practiced Judaism, acted like Catholics. There's the Inquisition, right? So how do you do this, and you don't create meaning and you don't pretend, you find your meaning.
Yeah.
And in some ways it leads to a more tolerant understanding of other faiths.
You have people going after this faith practice specifically in media. Most people's first introduction to Santa Muerte was seeing it in Breaking Bad. The Salamanca twins going there on their bellies and dragging themselves to an altar.
And if not there, Ghost Recon, right?
Yeah, Ghost Recon, the Bad Boys 3, all these aspects where they introduce her as a criminal specific, like dark entity that they pray to, like something almost demonic in a way, which I'm pretty certain they wouldn't dare do anything like that to any Native American spiritual effigies or icons to try and demonize them, or at least they won't now, but they used to.
Yeah.
Now,
they certainly won't do it to a dead man on a cross. Right? No matter how much he's bleeding, no matter...
Yeah.
So I grew up Jewish. The first time I walked into a cathedral and saw Jesus on the wall, it terrified me, man. I thought that was the scariest thing. Like, you pray in here in front of that guy?
Yeah.
That's very scary. He looks like... Someone get him down from there. He looks like someone there, he's hurt.
Yeah. But that kind of free license that people feel or they have to just mock and or criticize and or just basically call something demonic that somebody really believes in, that are people out there that really have a faith in, and also people that really use it as a center point of who they are and what they practice, and how people feel free to, to say certain things about it.
It's interesting. I think about it kind of how you just described it. I feel like something just clicked for me here, right? She is really truly like an expression of Mexican identity in many ways, right? The hybridity, the history, everything, the ever presence of death, even the present, not just historic. What they want to associate her with, this weird American stereotype of Mexicanism. Yeah. They're all criminals. Their saint is a criminal saint. It's this weird constructed. The sociologists go down to Mexico and they're like, this place is dangerous and sketchy.
So this is a downtrodden criminal saint.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's my take on it. Yeah. Because you see that's how it goes out.
Yeah. I mean, the first public altar to Santa Muerte that most people recognize, it was in the center of one of the most, Barrio Bravo, Tepito, one of the most dangerous places in Mexico City. And the criminal aspect of some of the people that are faithful is apparent, but what gets missed with some of the people and academics that go cover some of these aspects of the faith, they'll see these criminals all tatted up, which make great visuals, but you don't see their mothers,
right? Who are there right with them, and their babies, and their
who are faithful and are not criminals.
And that altar wasn't set up by criminals; it was set up by a mother, right?
You don't see the taxi driver crawling on his knees because he doesn't make for a cool picture.
Yeah.
You don't see the quiet politician being there with a hat and glasses on, putting flowers up, and then leaving because it might be bad for press later on.
Right.
So it's an interesting aspect of how some of these things get warped and missed, and how this one is a scary one, and probably one of a few public people that talk about their faith in an open way that is related to this.
That's not known specifically for it. Yeah.
And for me it's been an experience, specifically as somebody that wants to not only bring a little bit of awareness as a cultural heritage aspect, and the need for people to respect this type of this practice, but also how it's no longer a Mexican specific thing,
Well, and back to that idea where like it's never been a pure, like everyone's always died, and we've always had to connect with that.
Yeah.
And now we have like, shoot, man, I hope it doesn't go the way of Taco Bell. I hope it goes the way of some of the good taquerias in my town. Like there's cultural exchange is a real thing in the day and age of ships, let alone the internet. Right now it's instantaneous and around the world, and things that are relevant across time and space are going to resonate. And I think it's interesting how this particular form resonates with people. I think it's interesting how it speaks to American identity really loves its own shadow, which is the Mexican identity that the Americans construct, right? Love gangster movies. Americans created gangster movies, hip-hop, gangster rap, not just hip-hop, but gangster rap, the American media machine loves this stuff. So the fact that something that's universally resonant was squeezed into Americanism through this othering media machine, especially with like the culture leaders being obsessed with this idea of staying young and all these things, celebrities staying young, all this, looking young at least, feeling young.
Dead celebrities being resuscitated and put on in a film, or
sure, we'll have someone perform in hologram, and I went to this conference of various entrepreneurs and industry leaders. They had this doctor talking about like, we're gonna live to 120, and that's this strange trying to avoid what's a universal discussion, maybe because they don't have a form. And now we have a form.
I in the tradition that I came up in, the flower offerings on my altar are put up when they're beautiful and green and lush. Then they dry. And when they dry, you don't take them out and replace them with new ones. You take those, tie them, flip them over, and let them dry on the altar. And you don't remove them until they start becoming particles. It will start really,
disintegrating,
right? my daughter, she witnessed that phenomenon herself when she was little, and she saw in it a powerful lesson. She started sweeping up some of the dust coming off the flowers and some of the crumbly bits of the flowers into a dustpan and throwing them out. She said, wow, that's an interesting aspect of this, flowers being beautiful, flowers being dry, and then they're gone. She's small, she's a kid. There's a lot of kids out there that death is never introduced to them in any way, shape, or form. They're like kept safe from it, sterilized. No, that doesn't happen. Your dog went away to a ranch. This aspect of the culture. Now, in that regard, the comfort it provides people like myself, people like you, other people out there. What do you think Santa Muerte's place would be in somebody's life that is looking for some sort of direction, some sort of help, some sort of recognition that a lot of what we suffer with it is avoidance.
Yeah, I mean, you and I both talk to a lot of people who are at those periods in their life, right?
Yeah, military service personnel members, people coming back from a deployment,
leaving an addiction, changing their life,
abusive relationships, people coming in trying to look for something, some sort of direction, some sort of meaning, some sort of connection to something.
Yeah, and in a real way, it sets a baseline.
Yeah.
Right. You have your first of all, as soon as you connect with your death, all of a sudden your ancestors are much more present. Right. When you, rather than saying my ancestors are gone, my grandmother is gone, my grandmother's dead. Sooner than later, in the grand scheme of things, I will be dead like my grandmother and my great-grandmother and my great-great-grandmother, all the way back to my first ancestors. And in that way, I'm almost waiting for admittance into that esteemed lineage, right? That goes all the way back to the beginning of our species to bring us to here and now.
It makes it matter.
So much. I'm a project that goes back. You're a project. You're a project that goes back to the beginning of our species.
Yeah.
And when we avoid that and only value the fresh, the youthful,
the fresh flowers,
the live, the young actors, the fast moving, the flashy.
Yeah.
We have no foundation.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, that stuff's very good distraction.
Now, an aspect of this that is pretty interesting is that there's no central figure. There's no organization.
There's no pope.
There's no pope. There's no governing body.
Yeah.
This has been something that just manifests and pops out in different places. I've seen it in Mexican prison systems, not equating it to criminality, but some people in prison will want to figure some things out, and they use that as a focal point.
Just as you find Catholics and everything there.
Then me as a medical student, some of my friends who were medical students going to the Tijuana grave, the first cemetery of Tijuana, Panteón Número Uno, and going to Juan Soldado's grave, of a Mexican folk saint, and putting a candle there, wanting to get a favor from somebody that died of a wrongful death. These aspects of people kind of seeking out some of these cracks in reality through events, folk saints, moments, spaces of worship, waypoints and direction in some of these stories and some of the background of some of these saints. People want it. I sense that a lot of people, when they see some of the things that I express, they're like, oh, that's interesting. Where can I find out more?
What book can I read? What website can I look at?
Yeah, right. I am not the owner of any truth, and so we are two individuals for way different backgrounds, trying to figure things out. And
say it like this, right? We can both look at a sunset, try to describe the sunset. Neither of us said what is the sunset looks like. I have a collection of a lot of information related to not only the things that I saw and the people I talked to, and some of the information that I found out for myself, both as somebody working in the most dangerous city on the planet for a while, to being a practitioner and actually taking that faith through the process of fighting that war, and sharing some of the aspects of it that I learned. Right. We are working on a project, a pretty interesting one. You should say we have been.
We have been. Yeah, we have been working on this interesting project. we're nicknaming it for now the saint and the monk, or la santa y el monje. Do you want to talk about that project?
Sure, let's talk about it. Yeah, when you first, I think we have been working on it since that first conversation when I took Urban Movement, and we sat down afterwards, and immediately we started like comparing notes. It's this built-up thing that like we kind of had DMs, but it was the first time we had a table together, and the reality of how people actually practice. Yeah. Right? That sincere, and not, in America especially, Santa Muerte gets very much wedged into the occultism section. Yeah, of course. Right? The teen witch books and Santa Muerte are in the same shelf. Yeah. And so it doesn't have the elements of devotion that are really learned and inspired by Catholicism, right? Found in Catholicism largely. And in the same elements of like personal devotion, sacrifice, the other higher virtues that we get from the pre-Conquest, pre-Columbian traditions that feed into it. And it takes this American sort of, I want to find control through death form. Yeah. There's a very American attitude towards death, right?
It's an interesting aspect that you can influence and control it in that way.
Through death, with death, right? Yeah. We that's how we do America. And then when we look at the rest of the world, it's, and pre-America everywhere, we have this more, I'm at the mercy, at the end of the day, I'm at the mercy of death. Not I'm going to control others through death. So finding that attitude that gives us more of that connection to the past, more of that connection to a way of life rather than an activity. Yeah. Yeah. And a way of life as something that's not a statement. It's not a fashion. Yeah. It's not a subculture. It's a way of life, just like I have smoothies in the morning is a way of life, right? I don't have a shirt about the fact that I have smoothies in the morning,
I have experienced this faith in every single epicenter of its origin, from all over Mexico to even in the U.S., how it's kind of shifted and changed. I've seen people sell online classes about, how to use Santa Muerte to influence reality in a way, or how to perform ritual magic with it. And people mixing Chinese iconography with it and not really knowing why. The first Santa Muerte statues in Mexico, the publicly available ones, were all made in China.
Ones that weren't handmade, right?
That's why they have Buddhas and elephants on the bottom of it, because the Chinese didn't have anything else to load with them. Small details and aspects of the history of it that I want to be able to find a way to share with the general public. And the main thing is to take a snapshot of what it was before TikTok, Instagram, people trying to make money off it, people trying to, sell a whole thesis on it as far as this is what it is, and I wasn't born in that environment. I'm not from there. I never went through the rituals. I never went through the initiations. I never went through any of that. But this is my practice. This is.
But I know for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So, with this book, as far as my intentions with it and working with you, we're planning on a trip to Tijuana.
Yeah.
When you can finally actually be on in studio with us.
Yes, that's. I'm looking forward to it.
So I can take you to some of the places where I kind of learned about it and how it's kind of taken root out there.
I think one of the things that I love about what we've discussed on the project is the idea of almost approaching it as a survival manual, in the sense of like, here's a bunch of the bare bones essentials that, if you look at any army field manual, it's not the only way to do that. Yeah, it's just a reliable way to do it. Yeah. And the fact that like and why is it the army way? Because it's the simplest one to explain to anyone, and it's how people who do this stuff actually do it. Just like how you teach, right? Like, how do people actually do this? Yeah. We're going to try to create that in a way that is not esoteric. Yeah. That is very...
So you could see what it is, where it comes from, some of the history, some of the symbology, and we have documentation for it in a lot of ways. So that's going to be an interesting project. Thank you for hopping on this conversation with us. We are currently on our way back to California to do a bunch of other insane shit. Yeah. But thank you for coming on with us and having this conversation with us. I think it's an interesting subject. I think it's a timely one. I think people out there are interested, and let's see if we can provide a good product for them as far as a book at the end of this project.
I think the end result is going to be something that is going to be filling a lot of people, what a lot of people are looking for.
Awesome. We'll see you in a bit.